The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I watched my sister Rachel beam at her guests, her emerald dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. The country club ballroom buzzed with laughter and congratulations, but I might as well have been invisible. Standing near the oak-paneled wall, I adjusted my navy blazer and tried to blend into the wallpaper pattern behind me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Ladies and gentlemen, Rachel's voice carried across the room as she clinked her glass with a silver spoon. I'd like you all to meet the love of my life, Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell. A tall man with sandy hair and kind eyes stepped forward, his dress uniform pristine with ribbons I recognized from my own military service. The crowd applauded as he wrapped his arm around Rachel's waist, but his gaze swept the room methodically, the way officers do when assessing terrain. That's when his eyes found mine. I froze. 23 years of active duty had taught me to read faces, and what I saw in his expression made my chest tighten. Recognition. Not the casual kind you get from meeting someone at a cocktail party, but the sharp, immediate acknowledgement of someone who knows exactly who you are. Thank you all for being here, James continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. Rachel has told me so much about her family, and I'm honored to be joining yours. But as he spoke, his eyes kept drifting back to me. I shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how I'd positioned myself in the shadows while the rest of the family held court near the marble fireplace. My mother, Patricia Weber, glided through the crowd in her signature pearl necklace and burgundy silk. At 68, she still commanded attention with her silver hair perfectly styled and her smile practiced from decades of charity galas. She paused beside each guest, her hand resting lightly on their arms as she spoke in hushed, intimate tones. James comes from such a distinguished family, she was saying to the Hendersons, our longtime neighbors. His father was a federal judge, and his grandfather served in Congress. Rachel really couldn't have done better. I watched from my corner as she gracefully avoided the section of the room where I stood. It wasn't accidental. Nothing Patricia Weber did was ever accidental. My brother David approached the couple, his wife Sarah trailing behind with their twin daughters. At 42, David had inherited our father's broad shoulders and easy smile, along with his law practice. The girls, maybe 8 years old, wore matching pink dresses and clutched small bouquets of white roses. "Uncle James!" they squealed, running to him with the enthusiasm only children could muster. He knelt to their level, his face lighting up. "There are my favorite flower girls," he said, adjusting the ribbon in the younger one's hair. "Are you ready for the big day?" "We've been practicing walking really slow," the older twin announced solemnly. "Mommy says we can't run down the aisle even if we're excited." The crowd chuckled, and I found myself smiling despite the knot in my stomach. James had an easy way with children, patient and genuine. Rachel had chosen well, at least in that regard. "Now where's that other daughter of mine?" Patricia's voice carried across the room. "I want James to meet everyone." My breath caught. Finally. After standing here for 45 minutes, nursing the same glass of champagne and watching my family celebrate without me, I was about to be included. But Patricia's eyes swept right past me to the elderly woman seated near the terrace doors. "Aunt Margaret, come tell James about the family vineyard in Napa." The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. I stood there, invisible, as relatives and family friends took turns sharing stories and offering congratulations. James participated gracefully, asking thoughtful questions and remembering details from previous conversations. The man had clearly been briefed on everyone who mattered. Everyone except me. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to collect myself. The marble countertop felt cool against my palms as I stared at my reflection. At 51, I looked older than my years. The gray at my temples had spread more than I'd realized, and the lines around my eyes spoke of too many years squinting in desert sun and fluorescent base lighting. My dress uniform hung in my closet at home, ribbons and medals a testament to 2 decades of service that had taken me from Fort Bragg to Afghanistan to the Pentagon. But tonight, in my civilian clothes, I felt smaller somehow, less significant. When I returned to the ballroom, the crowd had shifted. James stood alone near the bar, surveying the room with the same methodical attention I'd noticed earlier. Our eyes met across the space, and this time he walked directly toward me. "Commander Johnson," he said quietly, his voice carrying the respect of one officer addressing another. The words hit me like a physical blow. Commander Johnson. My rank, my name, spoken with the kind of reverence usually reserved for heroes or legends. But James Mitchell wasn't just being polite. He knew exactly who I was. "I'm sorry," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think you have me confused with someone else." James's expression didn't change. "Afghanistan 2019. Forward Operating Base Chapman. You were the commanding officer who coordinated the evacuation of wounded civilians during the marketplace bombing." The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor. The sharp sound cut through the conversation around us, and suddenly every eye in the room was on us. "Oh my!" Patricia rushed over, her face flushed with embarrassment. "How clumsy. Let me get someone to clean this up." But James didn't move. He stood at attention, his shoulders squared, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. 17 lives, he continued, his voice carrying despite the chaos around us. "You saved 17 lives that day. My men were among them." The room had gone quiet, not the comfortable quiet of people pausing to listen, but the heavy, awkward silence of people witnessing something they didn't understand. Rachel appeared at James's side, her face confused and slightly annoyed. "Honey, what's going on? Who are you talking to?" "This is Commander Johnson," James said, never breaking eye contact with me. "She's a decorated officer and a hero. She saved lives under fire." "Commander Johnson?" Rachel's voice was sharp with confusion. "James, I think you're mistaken. This is just Amy." Just Amy. The words stung more than they should have. Just Amy, the family afterthought. Just Amy, standing in the corner with her broken champagne glass and her civilian clothes, pretending to belong somewhere she clearly didn't. "There's been a misunderstanding," I said quickly, stepping back from the growing crowd. I used to serve, but I'm not anyone special." James's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, with respect, that's not true. You received the Bronze Star for your actions that day. Your tactical decisions saved my sergeant's life." The Bronze Star, I'd kept it in a drawer at home, never displayed, never mentioned. It was just a piece of metal attached to a ribbon, a reminder of a day I'd rather forget. But to James, it meant something more. "I think there's been some confusion," Patricia interjected, her voice carrying the authority she used to manage difficult situations. "Amy works in logistics. She's never been in combat." The lie came so easily, so naturally, that I almost believed it myself. Logistics. As if my 2 decades of service, my deployments, my leadership under fire could be reduced to moving supplies around a warehouse. James looked from Patricia to me, his expression shifting from respect to something approaching anger. "Mrs. Weber, I'm sorry, but that's not accurate. Commander Johnson served with distinction in multiple combat deployments. She's exactly the kind of officer we need more of." "Well, I'm sure Amy appreciates the compliment," Patricia said with a tight smile. "But perhaps we should return to celebrating Rachel and your engagement." The dismissal was smooth, practiced, effective. Within seconds, the conversation had shifted back to wedding plans and honeymoon destinations. James was pulled away by David, who wanted to discuss bachelor party plans. Rachel was surrounded by her girlfriends, eager to hear about dress fittings and flower arrangements. And I stood there, holding the pieces of my shattered champagne glass, invisible once again. But something had changed. For the first time in years, someone had seen me. Not just Amy, the forgotten daughter. Not just the woman who sent birthday cards that went unacknowledged and made phone calls that were returned days later, if at all. Commander Johnson. A name that carried weight, respect, honor. A name my own family had chosen to forget. I set the glass fragments on a nearby table and walked toward the terrace doors, needing air, needing space, needing to think. Behind me, the party continued without missing a beat, but I could feel James's eyes following me as I stepped into the cool evening air. The country club's garden stretched out before me, Meticulously maintained hedges and flower beds illuminated by soft landscape lighting. I'd been here dozens of times over the years, for family celebrations and charity events, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, I felt like an intruder in my own life. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel, "Where did you go? You missed the cake cutting." I stared at the message, then deleted it without responding. Let them cut their cake. Let them toast their future. Let them celebrate their perfect life with their perfect family. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I had some thinking to do. The hotel room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and artificial vanilla. I sat on the edge of the queen bed, still wearing my navy blazer, staring at the uniform hanging in my closet back home. 60 miles away from the country club, 60 miles away from the celebration that had continued long after I'd slipped out through the garden gate. The Holiday Inn Express wasn't exactly five-star accommodations, but it was anonymous. The desk clerk had barely looked up when I'd checked in, paying cash for a single night. No questions, no small talk, no assumptions about why someone would need a room at 10:30 on a Saturday night in suburban Columbus. I kicked off my heels and pulled the decorative pillows off the bed, arranging them on the floor as a makeshift meditation space. Old habits. In Afghanistan, I'd learned to find calm anywhere. In a supply tent during a sandstorm, in a bunker during mortar fire, in the back of a transport helicopter flying over hostile territory. James Mitchell's voice echoed in my mind. Commander Johnson, the way he'd said it, with such certainty, such respect. It had been 3 years since anyone had called me by my rank. 3 years since I'd retired and returned to Ohio, hoping to reconnect with a family that had grown comfortable with my absence. I closed my eyes and let myself remember that day in 2019. The marketplace bombing had happened at 0847 hours, during the morning rush when vendors were setting up their stalls and families were buying fresh bread. The blast had been massive, a coordinated attack designed for maximum civilian casualties. My radio had crackled to life before the dust had settled. Command, we have multiple casualties, including non-combatants. Request immediate medical evacuation. But the landing zone was compromised. Sniper fire from 3 different buildings, secondary explosives still detonating, and a crowd of panicked civilians running in every direction. Standard protocol would have been to secure the area first, wait for the all-clear from explosive ordnance disposal. I hadn't waited. Bravo team, establish overwatch on buildings 2 and 4. Charlie team, sweep for secondary devices. Alpha team with me, we're going in. The next 4 hours had been a blur of tactical decisions and split-second judgments. Coordinate with the helicopter pilots to navigate the hostile airspace. Direct ground teams to establish safe corridors through the rubble. Triage the wounded while maintaining defensive positions. 17 people. Men, women, children. A shopkeeper who'd been setting up his fruit stand. A mother carrying her infant son. An elderly man who'd been buying tea. And 3 American soldiers, including Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from James's unit. I'd carried Rodriguez to the helicopter myself when his medic had been pinned down by sniper fire. 200 yards across broken concrete and twisted metal, his blood soaking through my uniform, his weight threatening to buckle my knees. Stay with me, Rodriguez, I whispered as we lifted off. Your kids need their dad. He'd survived. They all had. The Bronze Star had arrived 6 months later, along with a commendation letter that used words like exceptional leadership under fire and extraordinary heroism. I'd read it once, then filed it away in a drawer with my other military documents. My family had never asked to see it. I opened my eyes and reached for my phone, scrolling through the contacts until I found the number I hadn't called in over a year. Dr. Elizabeth Santos, my former therapist at the VA hospital. We'd worked together for 18 months after my retirement, processing what she'd called adjustment challenges, and what I'd called learning to be a civilian again. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Her voice was warm, professional, exactly as I remembered. You've reached Dr. Santos. Please leave a message and I'll return your call during business hours. Hi, Dr. Santos. This is Amy Johnson. I know it's been a while, but I think I might need to schedule some sessions again. Something happened tonight that's made me realize I haven't been dealing with things as well as I thought. I paused, staring at my reflection in the dark hotel window. I'll call your office Monday to set something up. I hung up and pulled out my laptop, opening a document I'd started but never finished. Transition Journal, Year 3, the header read. Dr. Santos had suggested I keep writing even after our sessions ended, as a way to process the ongoing challenges of civilian life. The cursor blinked at me from an empty page. Where to begin? Tonight, someone remembered who I used to be. I deleted the line and tried again. For 23 years, I knew exactly who I was. Commander Amy Johnson, United States Army. I led troops, made decisions that saved lives, earned the respect of my peers and superiors. I had purpose, mission, identity. Then I retired. My family threw a small party. Mom made a sheet cake with "Welcome Home, Amy" written in blue frosting. David gave a speech about how proud they were of my service. Rachel posted photos on social media with captions about her hero sister. But even then, I could feel it starting. The slow erasure of Commander Johnson, the gradual transformation back into just Amy, the daughter who'd never quite fit the family mold, who'd chosen a different path, who'd been away for so long that her chair at the dinner table had been repurposed as a place to stack mail. I stopped typing and walked to the window. The parking lot below was mostly empty, just a few scattered cars under the yellow streetlights. Somewhere in the distance, I could see the glow of the interstate, endless streams of headlights carrying people to places they belonged. When I first came home, I tried to create a new identity, Amy the consultant, using my logistics experience to help small businesses optimize their supply chains. Amy the volunteer, working with veteran support organizations. Amy the dutiful daughter, showing up for family dinners and birthday parties and holiday celebrations. But none of it had stuck. The consulting work was mind-numbing after years of life and death decisions. The volunteer work reminded me too much of what I'd lost. And the family gatherings. The family gatherings had become exercises in endurance. I remembered last Christmas, sitting at Patricia's dining room table while she recounted David's latest courtroom victory and Rachel's promotion at the marketing firm. The conversation had flowed around me like I was furniture, present but not participating, acknowledged but not included. Amy's been doing some consulting work, Patricia had mentioned when Aunt Margaret asked about my life. Consulting work. As if my 23 years of military service could be summarized in such mundane terms. I tried to interject, to share something about my actual experience. I was working with a veteran-owned trucking company, helping them implement some of the logistics systems we used in Afghanistan. That's nice, dear, Patricia had interrupted smoothly. Rachel, tell everyone about the new client you landed. And that had been it. My contribution to the conversation was dismissed, forgotten, irrelevant. I'd stopped trying after that. But tonight had been different. Tonight, James Mitchell had looked at me and seen Commander Johnson. Not the family disappointment. Not the middle-aged woman who'd never married or had children. Not the black sheep who'd chosen military service over a traditional career. He'd seen the officer who'd earned the Bronze Star, the leader who'd saved 17 lives, the woman who'd carried wounded soldiers to safety while under enemy fire. For 5 minutes in that ballroom, I'd remembered who I really was. My phone buzzed with a text message. Rachel again. Mom says you left early. Is everything okay? Call me tomorrow. I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone aside without responding. Everything was not okay. Everything hadn't been okay for 3 years, but I'd been too busy trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me to admit it. Dr. Santos had warned me about this during our sessions. Military identity is very strong, she'd said. When that identity is suddenly removed, it can feel like losing yourself entirely. Some veterans struggle with the transition for years. I'd thought I was different. I thought I was handling it well. I'd thought that keeping busy and staying connected with family would be enough to build a new life. I'd been wrong. The laptop screen had gone dark. I touched the trackpad, bringing the document back to life, and continued typing. I spent tonight at my sister's engagement party being invisible, For 3 hours I stood in corners and smiled politely while my family celebrated around me. I watched my mother introduce her future son-in-law to everyone who mattered, and apparently, I don't matter. But then something happened. James recognized me, not as Amy the forgotten daughter, but as Commander Johnson, the decorated officer. He knew about Afghanistan, about the Bronze Star, about the lives I'd saved. He looked at me with the kind of respect I haven't felt in 3 years. And I realized something. I've been grieving, not just the end of my military career, but the death of my identity. I've been trying so hard to become someone my family could understand, that I've forgotten who I actually am. I'm not just Amy, I'm Commander Amy Johnson, and I've earned the right to be proud of that. I saved the document and closed the laptop. Tomorrow I would call Dr. Santos's office. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out how to reclaim my identity without losing my family entirely. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I would go to sleep remembering that I was more than just someone's daughter or sister. I was a commander. I was a leader. I was a veteran who'd served with honor. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The morning sun filtered through the hotel curtains as I sat cross-legged on the floor, my laptop balanced on my knees. I'd been awake since 5:30, a habit from decades of military life that civilian retirement hadn't managed to break. The coffee from the lobby machine was bitter and weak, but it was hot, and that was enough. I'd opened a new document, this one titled simply Timeline. If I was going to understand how I'd become invisible in my own family, I needed to trace the pattern back to its source. Age 18, enlisted in the Army immediately after high school graduation. Parents wanted me to go to college first, get a degree, have something to fall back on. Dad said the military was no place for girls. Mom worried I was running away from real life. Even then, Patricia had seen my choice as a rebellion rather than a calling. I remembered the argument in our kitchen the night before I left for basic training. She'd stood at the sink, her hands submerged in soapy water, refusing to look at me. "You're throwing your life away, Amy," she'd said to the dishes instead of to me. "Smart girls don't join the Army. Smart girls go to college, find good husbands, build proper careers." David had been home from his freshman year at Ohio State, already talking about law school and following in Dad's footsteps. Rachel was only 14 then, but even she'd seemed puzzled by my decision. "Why do you want to go fight wars?" she'd asked, with the directness only teenagers could manage. I'd tried to explain it, the sense of purpose, the desire to serve something bigger than myself, the appeal of clear missions and defined objectives. But my words had fallen flat in that suburban kitchen with its flower-printed wallpaper and carefully arranged fruit bowl. "You'll understand when you get older," Patricia had finally said, which was her way of ending conversations she didn't want to have. Age 22, commissioned as second lieutenant after completing officer candidate school, graduated top of my class. Parents attended the ceremony but left early for David's college graduation party. I remembered that day vividly. The pride of earning my gold bars, the weight of new responsibility settling on my shoulders like a perfectly fitted uniform. I'd looked out into the audience during the ceremony, searching for familiar faces among the families celebrating their newly commissioned officers. Patricia and my father Robert had been there, sitting in the back row. Patricia wore her Navy dress, the one she saved for important occasions, and Dad had actually put on a tie. But even from the stage, I could see Patricia checking her watch, glancing toward the exit. They'd stayed for photos but skipped the reception. "David's party starts at 6, Patricia had explained as she kissed my cheek. "You understand. We promised we'd be there." I understood. David's college graduation was a real achievement, something that made sense to them. My commission was just another step in what they saw as my prolonged detour from normal life. Age 25, first deployment to Iraq. Spent 15 months in charge of supply operations for Forward Operating Base Liberty. Managed logistics for 2,500 personnel. Reduced supply delivery time by 40% through implementation of new tracking systems. That deployment had been my proving ground. 18-hour days in temperatures that reached 130 degrees, coordinating convoys through hostile territory, making sure every soldier had what they needed to complete their mission and come home alive. I'd called home once a week when satellite communications allowed it, The conversations had been stilted, awkward. Patricia would ask if I was eating enough and staying safe, as if I were at summer camp instead of a war zone. David would share updates about law school. Rachel, now in college herself, would talk about sorority rush and spring break plans. None of them ever asked about my work, my soldiers, my responsibilities. When I tried to explain the complexities of managing supply chains in a combat environment, I could hear the polite disinterest in their voices. "That sounds very complicated, dear," Patricia would say. "Well, we should let you go. These calls must be expensive." Age 28, promoted to captain. Led a team that revolutionized inventory management across 3 forward operating bases. Received Army Commendation Medal for exceptional service. The promotion ceremony had been held at Fort Bragg. I'd invited my family, sent them the details months in advance, even offered to pay for their flights. Patricia had called 3 days before the ceremony. "I'm so sorry, Amy, but we just can't make it. David's getting married that weekend, and there's so much to do." You understand. I hadn't understood. David's wedding was still 6 months away, and this was a promotion ceremony, not a casual visit. But I'd said what I always said. "Of course, Mom. Don't worry about it." I'd stood on that stage alone, surrounded by other newly promoted officers whose families had traveled from across the country to be there. During the reception, my commanding officer had asked about my family. "They couldn't make it," I'd said, trying to keep my voice light. "Prior commitment." He'd nodded politely, but I'd seen the question in his eyes. "What kind of prior commitment took precedence over your daughter's promotion?" Age 32nd deployment to Afghanistan. Led convoy security operations through the most dangerous province in the country. 0 casualties under my command during 12-month deployment. Afghanistan had been different from Iraq. More dangerous, more complex, with mission parameters that changed daily. I'd been responsible for ensuring safe passage for humanitarian aid convoys, working with local village leaders, navigating political sensitivities that could shift with a single misstep. During that deployment, David's wedding had taken place. I'd watched the ceremony via a grainy video call on a laptop in my quarters, the connection cutting out every few minutes. Rachel had held the phone, trying to angle it so I could see the altar, but mostly I'd gotten ceiling shots and glimpses of flower arrangements. "I wish you could be here," Rachel had whispered during a quiet moment. "Me too," I'd said, meaning it. But even as I watched my brother exchange vows with Sarah, I'd known that if I'd been stateside, there would have been some reason why my presence wasn't quite right. The wrong dress, the wrong timing, the wrong something that would have marked me as the outsider I'd always been. Age 35, promoted to major. Assigned to the Pentagon, working in strategic logistics planning. Developed new supply chain protocols that were implemented Army-wide. The Pentagon years should have been impressive to my family. Working in the nation's capital, contributing to policies that affected military operations worldwide, earning recognition from senior leadership. But when I tried to explain my work during family visits, I'd be met with glazed expressions and quick subject changes. "It's all so complicated," Patricia would say. "I don't know how you keep track of it all." Then she'd turn to David to discuss his latest case, or ask Rachel about her marketing campaigns. Their careers were relatable, comprehensible, worthy of dinner-table conversation. Mine was just military jargon and acronyms that didn't translate to civilian life. Age 40, Afghanistan deployment, forward operating base Chapman. The marketplace bombing. The Bronze Star. I stopped typing and stared at that entry. Even now, 6 years later, I could feel my heart rate increase just thinking about that day. Not from trauma. Dr. Santos had helped me work through the clinical aspects of combat stress, but from the memory of being truly, completely myself. In those 4 hours of chaos and gunfire, I hadn't been the family disappointment or the daughter who'd chosen wrong. I'd been Commander Johnson, making decisions that saved lives, leading soldiers who trusted me with their survival. When the Bronze Star citation had arrived, I'd called home to share the news. Patricia had listened politely, made appropriate sounds of congratulation, then immediately shifted the conversation to Rachel's new boyfriend and whether he might propose soon. "A Bronze Star," she'd repeated, as if testing unfamiliar words. "That's very nice, dear. Your father will be proud." But Dad hadn't called. David hadn't sent a congratulations text. Rachel hadn't posted about it on social media the way she did when she got promoted at work. The Bronze Star had been filed away in their minds the same way they'd filed away every other aspect of my military career. Acknowledged but not celebrated, noted but not understood. Age 45, promoted to lieutenant colonel, assigned to command a logistics battalion, 800 soldiers under my leadership. Responsible for supply operations across 3 states. Command had been the pinnacle of my career. 800 soldiers, from fresh-faced privates to seasoned sergeants, all looking to me for leadership, guidance, direction. I'd known every one of their names, their strengths, their challenges. I'd written commendation letters and performance evaluations, made decisions about promotions and assignments, helped young soldiers navigate their careers and their personal lives. At home, my new rank had been met with the same polite disinterest as every other promotion. "Lieutenant Colonel," Patricia had repeated when I'd told her. My goodness, that sounds very important. But she'd said it the same way she might comment on the weather, acknowledging the information without any real investment in its significance. Age 48, retirement ceremony, 23 years of service, honorable discharge with full benefits. Family attended but left immediately after for Rachel's birthday dinner. My retirement ceremony had been held on a crisp October morning at Fort Gordon. My soldiers had been there, my fellow officers, my commanding general who'd spoken about my, quote, exemplary service and unwavering dedication to duty. My family had sat in the front row, Patricia in her navy dress again, David checking his phone, Rachel fidgeting with her purse. They stood for the national anthem, applauded at the appropriate moments, smiled for photos. But as soon as the formal ceremony ended, Patricia had approached me with that familiar look of polite urgency. "This was lovely, Amy, but we really need to get going. We have dinner reservations for Rachel's birthday, and you know how impossible it is to get a table at that new place downtown." I'd still been wearing my dress uniform, my ribbons and medals catching the afternoon sunlight. Around us, other retirees were celebrating with their families, sharing stories, making plans for the future. "Of course," I'd said, because that's what I always said. "Don't let me keep you." I'd driven myself home that night, still in my uniform, and sat in my empty apartment with a bottle of wine and a retirement gift from my soldiers. A photo collage of our deployments together, our missions, our successes. 23 years of service, reduced to an obligation that had to be squeezed in before dinner reservations. I closed the laptop and walked to the hotel window. In the parking lot below, families were loading luggage into their cars, starting their journeys home after weekend getaways. Normal families, going to normal places, where everyone belonged and everyone mattered. For the first time in years, I was beginning to understand that the problem wasn't me. The problem was that I'd spent 3 decades trying to earn a place in a family that had decided long ago that my achievements didn't count, my service didn't matter, and my identity wasn't worth celebrating. Last night, James Mitchell reminded me who I really was. Now I needed to figure out what to do with that knowledge. I checked out of the hotel at noon, but instead of driving home, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the Columbus Metropolitan Library. The main branch was quiet on Sunday afternoons, filled with students studying and families browsing the children's section. I claimed a corner table in the research area and opened my laptop. Something had been nagging at me since last night, a detail that didn't quite fit. James Mitchell had known about Afghanistan, about the Bronze Star, about details that even my own family had never bothered to learn. But how? Military records weren't public information, and we'd only met twice before the engagement party. I started with a simple Google search, James Mitchell, Lieutenant Colonel, Army. The results were immediate and extensive. Unlike my own virtually non-existent digital footprint, James had a robust online presence. There he was in a military publication from 2018, receiving a commendation for his work with NATO forces in Eastern Europe. Another article from 2020 highlighted his role in coordinating humanitarian aid during natural disasters. A Pentagon press release from 2019 mentioned his assignment to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the same year as the Marketplace bombing. I dug deeper, searching military databases I still had access to through my veteran credentials. James's service record was impressive. West Point graduate, multiple deployments, fast-track promotions, assignments that indicated he was being groomed for senior leadership. And then I found it. An after-action report from Forward Operating Base Chapman, dated September 15, 2019. 3 weeks after the marketplace bombing. The document was classified but available to those with appropriate clearance. I downloaded it, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the PDF. Following the coordinated attack on the Chapman marketplace, this report details the exceptional leadership demonstrated by Lieutenant Colonel Amy Johnson during the evacuation of civilian casualties. The tactical decisions made by Commander Johnson directly resulted in the successful extraction of 17 wounded non-combatants and 3 U.S. personnel from a compromised zone under active enemy fire. The report was 37 pages long, filled with maps, timelines, and detailed analysis of every decision I'd made that day. But it wasn't just a dry military assessment. Embedded throughout were personal accounts from soldiers who'd been there. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez owes his life to Commander Johnson's quick thinking and personal courage. When medical evacuation was delayed due to sniper fire, she carried him to the landing zone herself, covering approximately 200 meters of open ground while under active fire. Commander Johnson's calm demeanor under extreme pressure kept our unit focused and effective. Her tactical decisions saved lives that day. The leadership displayed by Lieutenant Colonel Johnson exemplifies the highest traditions of the United States Army. Her actions merit the highest recognition. The report was authored by Colonel Marcus Webb, but it had been reviewed and endorsed by multiple senior officers, including the base commander and the regional operations chief, including Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, who had been serving as liaison officer between Chapman and Regional Command. My breath caught. James hadn't just heard about the marketplace bombing secondhand. He'd been part of the official review process. He'd read every page of this report, studied every tactical decision, analyzed every moment of that chaotic day. He knew exactly who I was because he'd spent weeks documenting my actions. I scrolled to the final section of the report, which contained recommendations for recognition and awards. There, in black and white, was the formal recommendation for my Bronze Star, co-signed by 5 senior officers, including James Mitchell. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson's extraordinary heroism and exceptional leadership under fire warrant the highest recognition. Her actions not only saved lives, but demonstrated the caliber of leadership that defines the United States Army at its finest. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The Bronze Star hadn't been some routine award handed out for 20 years of service. It had been specifically recommended by officers who'd studied my actions in detail, who'd deemed them worthy of one of the military's highest honors for courage. And my family had never bothered to find out what it meant. I pulled up another search, this time looking for information about Rachel's relationship with James. Their engagement announcement in the Columbus Dispatch mentioned that they'd met at a charity gala for wounded veterans. The article included a photo of them at the event. James in his dress uniform, Rachel in an elegant black gown. The gala had been organized by the Central Ohio Veterans Foundation, a nonprofit that provided support services for returning soldiers. I'd heard about the organization but had never gotten involved. Another missed opportunity to connect with my fellow veterans. I called the foundation's main number, expecting to reach an answering machine on a Sunday afternoon. Instead, a cheerful voice answered after 2 rings. Central Ohio Veterans Foundation, this is Maria. Hi, I'm sorry to bother you on a weekend. I'm Amy Johnson, a retired Army officer, and I was wondering if you could help me with some information about one of your events. Of course, what can I help you with? I'm trying to find out more about a charity gala you hosted, probably within the last year or 2. I believe Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell was involved somehow? Oh yes, James is wonderful. He's been one of our biggest supporters for the past 3 years. Are you thinking about getting involved with our programs? Maybe. Can you tell me more about his involvement? Well, he started volunteering after he returned from his last deployment. He coordinates our annual gala, helps with fundraising, and he's been instrumental in our scholarship program for children of fallen soldiers. Maria's voice warmed as she spoke. He's really passionate about making sure military families get the recognition and support they deserve. Military families getting the recognition they deserve. The irony was almost painful. The gala where he met his fiancée, I pressed gently. Do you remember anything about that evening? Oh, that was such a sweet story. Rachel came as someone's guest. I think it was her mother who bought a table. James was giving a presentation about our scholarship recipients, and Rachel was so moved by the stories. She came up to him afterward to ask how she could get more involved. Patricia had bought a table. My mother, who'd never shown the slightest interest in military affairs, who'd dismissed my service as a complicated career choice she didn't understand, had attended a veterans charity gala. Do you happen to remember if the whole family attended? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Let me think. I remember there was a group at their table. Rachel's mother, definitely. A gentleman who might have been her father, and a couple with twin daughters. Oh, and a young man who looked like he might be Rachel's brother. David, Sarah, and their twins. My entire family had been there, supporting wounded veterans, listening to stories about military service and sacrifice. Everyone except me. I thanked Maria and hung up, my mind racing. I pulled up the Foundation's website and found photos from their events over the past few years. It didn't take long to locate the gala in question. There they were, in a professional photo taken during the cocktail hour. Patricia in her signature pearls, looking elegant and engaged. David and Sarah flanking their daughters, who wore matching blue dresses. Rachel stunning in black silk, standing next to James in his dress uniform. The caption read, "The Weber family, generous supporters of our mission to honor and assist our nation's heroes." The Weber family. Not a single mention of their connection to an actual veteran. They were there as philanthropists, as supporters of the cause, as people who cared about military families, in the abstract. But they'd never once asked to hear my war stories. They'd never inquired about my soldiers or my missions. They'd never expressed interest in my experiences or my perspective on military life. I found more photos from that evening. James at the podium, speaking passionately about the Foundation's work, the audience listening intently, including my family in the front row. Patricia applauding, David nodding seriously, Rachel dabbing at her eyes during an emotional story about a Gold Star family. They could cry for strangers' sacrifices, but they couldn't celebrate their own daughter's achievements. I dug deeper into the Foundation's archives. There, in a program from 2 years ago, was a feature article about their scholarship recipients. The piece highlighted several young people who'd lost parents in military service, detailing their academic achievements and career goals. One paragraph made my heart stop. This year's scholarship committee was led by Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, whose dedication to honoring fallen heroes stems from his own experience serving alongside some of the Army's finest officers. "I've seen what real courage looks like," Mitchell said during the selection process. "These scholarships aren't just about money. They're about making sure the children of our heroes know that their parents' sacrifices mattered, that their service is remembered and honored. Real courage, sacrifices that mattered, service that should be remembered and honored." James Mitchell understood the weight of military service in a way my family never had. He valued courage and sacrifice because he'd witnessed it firsthand, had studied it in official reports, had worked to ensure it was properly recognized. And now he was marrying into a family that had spent 3 decades systematically erasing their own veterans' contributions. I opened a new browser tab and began researching something I'd never thought to investigate before: the process for nominating civilians for military-related honors. Could family members recommend their loved ones for recognition? Could they submit their own letters of support for awards and commendations? The answer was yes. Absolutely yes. Family members could write letters supporting award nominations. They could attend ceremonies. They could request information about their veteran service record. They could advocate for recognition, express pride in accomplishments, ensure that achievements were properly documented and celebrated. My family had done none of these things. Not because they didn't know how, but because they'd never cared enough to find out. I thought about all the times I'd downplayed my own achievements, all the moments I'd accepted their dismissal as normal family dynamics. I'd told myself they just didn't understand military culture, that civilian families couldn't be expected to grasp the significance of deployments and awards and command responsibilities. But they'd understood perfectly when it came to honoring other veterans. They'd written checks to support military families. They'd attended galas to celebrate military service. They'd listened respectfully to stories about courage and sacrifice. They just hadn't been willing to see those qualities in me. I closed the laptop and sat in the library's quiet atmosphere, processing what I'd discovered. This wasn't just about family dynamics or misunderstanding or different priorities. This was about willful blindness, active dismissal, a conscious choice to minimize my achievements while celebrating identical accomplishments in strangers. James Mitchell had seen through their facade immediately. He'd recognized the disconnect between their public support for veterans and their private treatment of their own family veteran. He'd understood that something was fundamentally wrong with a family that could honor military service in theory while ignoring it in practice. And tomorrow I was going to figure out what to do about it. For the first time in 3 years, I had more than just hurt feelings and disappointment. I had evidence, I had documentation, I had proof that my achievements were worthy of recognition, that my service had mattered, that I was exactly the kind of veteran my family claimed to support. I just wasn't the kind of daughter they wanted to claim. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that reminded me why I'd missed Ohio during my overseas deployments. I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee from a mug emblazoned with the Army Corps of Engineers insignia, a gift from my final command that I'd tucked away in a cabinet for 3 years. Today, it felt appropriate to bring it back out. I'd spent Sunday evening organizing everything I'd discovered into a comprehensive folder. Military service records, commendation letters, the after-action report from Afghanistan, photos from the Veterans Gala, screenshots of the Foundation's website. Each piece told part of a story, but together they painted a picture I was finally ready to see clearly. At 0800 hours, old habits die hard. I called Dr. Santos's office. Veterans Administration Mental Health Services. This is Jennifer. Hi, this is Amy Johnson. I left a message for Dr. Santos over the weekend about scheduling some follow-up sessions. Let me check her calendar. She has an opening Thursday at 2 or next Monday at 10. Thursday at 2 would be perfect. I'll put you down. Is this for continuation of previous treatment or a new issue? I paused, considering how to answer. Continuation, I suppose. I'm dealing with some family dynamics that I thought I'd resolved, but recent events have made me realize I need professional guidance. Of course. Dr. Santos will have your previous files ready. Is there anything specific you'd like me to note for her? Tell her it's about identity and family recognition. She'll understand. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began drafting what I mentally categorized as my intelligence brief. 23 years in the military had taught me the value of thorough preparation before any major operation. Objective: address the systematic dismissal of my military service and achievements by my immediate family. Background: family demonstrates public support for military causes while privately minimizing my service. This pattern has persisted for 30-plus years and requires strategic intervention. Key personnel: Patricia Weber, mother, organizes family dynamics, controls narrative. David Weber, brother, follows maternal lead, benefits from status quo. Rachel Weber, sister, passively complicit, focused on maintaining harmony. James Mitchell, Rachel's fiancé, ally with comprehensive understanding of military service. Evidence collected, official military documentation of achievements. Bronze Star citation and supporting documentation. The closet held a storage box I hadn't opened since moving in, my military memorabilia, letters of commendation, performance evaluations, photographs from deployments, certificates from training courses. I pulled out the Bronze Star case, running my fingers over the ribbon's red, white, and blue stripes. Beneath it was the citation, signed by a general whose name my family had never bothered to learn. For exceptionally valorous actions in direct combat with an armed enemy force. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson's extraordinary heroism and selfless service above and beyond the call of duty reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army. Extraordinary heroism, above and beyond the call of duty, words that should have meant something to the people who were supposed to love me most. I photographed the medal and citation, then continued through the box. Performance evaluations that consistently rated me in the top 5% of officers. Letters from soldiers I'd commanded, thanking me for my leadership and mentorship. A flag that had flown over our base in Afghanistan, presented to me by my troops when I left command. Each item told a story of service, leadership, and dedication. Together they documented a career that any family should have been proud to claim. My phone rang, interrupting my documentation process. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Amy. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all. What's up?" "I wanted to check on you. You left the party pretty suddenly Saturday night, and Mom was concerned." Mom was concerned. Not Rachel herself, but Mom. Even in her attempt to reach out, my sister was operating as Patricia's proxy. "I'm fine, Rachel. Just had an early morning yesterday and needed to get some rest." "Okay, good." James felt terrible about whatever happened. He said he might have embarrassed you by bringing up military stuff in front of everyone. I almost laughed. James felt terrible for acknowledging my achievements. Meanwhile, the family felt no shame about spending 3 decades ignoring them. "James didn't embarrass me, Rachel. If anything, he showed me more respect in 5 minutes than I've received from this family in 5 years. There was a long pause. "Amy, that's not fair. We've always been proud of your service." "Have you?" "Of course we have." "What's my rank, Rachel?" Another pause. "Your rank?" "When I retired, what rank did I hold?" You were an officer. A high-ranking officer." "Lieutenant Colonel. I was a lieutenant colonel. I commanded 800 soldiers, Rachel. 800 people trusted me with their careers, their safety, their lives. And you don't even know what to call me." "Amy, I don't understand why. What medal did I receive for my service in Afghanistan?" Silence. "What was the marketplace bombing, Rachel?" "Do you know what happened that day?" Amy, why are you asking me these things?" "Because your fiancé knew the answers to all of those questions. A man who's met me twice knew more about my military service than my own sister who's known me for 33 years. That's different. James is military too, so of course he would know about military things. Mom and Dad attended a veterans charity gala last year. They sat in the front row listening to stories about military service and sacrifice. They wrote a check to support wounded warriors. But they've never once asked me about my deployments, my soldiers, or my experiences." Rachel's voice became defensive. "We've always respected your privacy. We didn't want to pry into things that might be difficult for you to talk about." "Did anyone ever ask if I wanted to talk about them? Did anyone ever express curiosity about the 23 years I spent serving our country? Did anyone ever say, 'Tell me about your time in Afghanistan,' or 'What was it like being a commander?' We just thought—" "You thought wrong, Rachel. You all decided that my service was too complicated to understand, too military to be relevant, too foreign to your experience to be worth celebrating. So you ignored it. You minimized it. You reduced 23 years of my life to Amy works in logistics." "Amy, please. I know we haven't always handled things perfectly, but we love you. We're proud of you." "Are you?" "Because I spent Saturday night watching you introduce James to everyone who mattered, and apparently I don't matter enough to even rate an introduction." "That's not. You're taking this the wrong way." "Am I? Tell me, Rachel, when James asked about your family, did you mention that you have a sister who's a decorated combat veteran? When he was researching your background before proposing, did you tell him about my Bronze Star? When he was sharing stories about his military service, did you think to mention that he might have something in common with me?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Rachel? I'm here." Her voice was quiet, subdued. I guess I never thought about it that way." "That's the problem. None of you ever think about it. You don't think about me, my service, my achievements, or my experiences. You've erased me so thoroughly from the family narrative that when someone who actually knows military service meets me, it's a shock." "What do you want me to do, Amy?" "I want you to tell me why. Why is it easier for you to support wounded veterans you've never met than to celebrate the veteran in your own family? Why can you write checks for military charities but not remember my rank? Why can you cry over Gold Star families but not ask about my war stories?" I don't know, she whispered. Well, I'm going to find out. I hung up and returned to my documentation project. Rachel's call had confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't malicious intent, but it wasn't innocent ignorance either. It was willful indifference, a conscious choice to avoid engaging with an aspect of my life they found inconvenient or uncomfortable. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Rachel said, "You're upset about the party. Let's talk like adults." Talk like adults. As if I were the one being childish for expecting recognition after 3 decades of service. I set the phone aside and continued working. By noon, I had assembled a comprehensive portfolio of my military career. Service record, deployment orders, commendation letters, performance evaluations, the Bronze Star citation, photos from ceremonies and deployments, letters from soldiers I'd commanded. But I also had something else: documentation of my family's selective blindness, photos from the Veterans Gala, copies of their social media posts supporting military causes, screenshots of their donations to military charities, evidence that they understood the value of military service in principle, but refused to acknowledge it in practice. The question now was what to do with this information. I could confront them directly, demand explanations, force uncomfortable conversations about 30 years of dismissal and erasure. But experience had taught me that direct confrontation with my family typically resulted in deflection, gaslighting, and renewed efforts to make me the problem. I could simply walk away, cut contact, build a life that didn't include people who couldn't see my value. But that felt like running away, like letting them win through my absence. Or I could follow the example James had set at the engagement party. Professional, respectful, but absolutely clear about the truth. I thought about my military training, the countless briefings I'd given, the reports I'd written, the presentations I'd delivered to senior leadership. The most effective communications were always factual, well-documented, and impossible to dismiss. I opened a new document and began typing. To the Weber family, a comprehensive review of the disconnect between your public support for military service and your private treatment of your family veteran. It was time to prepare my own after-action report, one that would make it impossible for them to continue their willful blindness. One that would force them to see Commander Johnson, whether they wanted to or not. 3 days after my conversation with Rachel, I received an unexpected text from James. "Would you be available for coffee? I have some things I'd like to discuss." We met at a small cafe downtown, away from the family's usual haunts. James arrived in civilian clothes, but carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a career officer. He stood when I approached the table, a gesture of respect that caught me off guard. "Thank you for coming, ma'am," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "You don't need to call me ma'am, James. Amy is fine." "With respect, Commander, rank is rank." "Coffee?" He returned with 2 cups, settling across from me with the careful attention of someone about to navigate delicate terrain. "I owe you an apology," he began. "Saturday night wasn't the time or place for what happened, and I put you in an uncomfortable position." "You have nothing to apologize for." "I think I do. I've been researching your family since Rachel and I started dating, trying to understand the dynamics, and I noticed some inconsistencies." I waited, letting him find his words. "They attend military charity events. They donate to veteran causes. They post on social media about supporting our troops. But in 18 months of dating Rachel, your name has come up exactly 3 times, and never in connection with your military service." "That sounds about right." "It doesn't make sense. You're exactly the kind of veteran they claim to support. Decorated combat officer, Bronze Star recipient, distinguished career. You should be the first person they mention when military topics come up." I sipped my coffee, studying his face. "What do you want to know, James?" "I want to know what happened. How does a family that publicly honors military service completely ignore their own family veteran?" So I told him. Not everything that would have taken hours, but enough. The pattern of dismissal, the missed ceremonies, the reduction of my achievements to logistics work, the systematic erasure of Commander Johnson from the family narrative. James listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled as I spoke. "This isn't unusual," he said finally. I've seen it before. Families who can't reconcile their image of their daughter or sister with the reality of military leadership. They're more comfortable with you as a victim to be protected than as a warrior to be respected. Is that your professional assessment, Colonel? That's my personal observation, Commander, and it's unacceptable. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos until he found what he was looking for. This is from the Veterans Gala where I met Rachel. Your whole family applauding during my presentation about honoring military service. Your mother actually came up to me afterward to thank me for making sure our heroes are remembered. The irony was sharp enough to cut. What are you going to do about it? I asked. I'm going to make them see you, really see you, but I need your permission first. James's plan was elegantly simple. Rachel's bridal shower was scheduled for the following weekend, an event I'd been invited to but hadn't planned to attend. James suggested I reconsider. Come in uniform, he said. Full dress blues, ribbons, the works. When someone asks about it, tell them exactly who you are and what you've done. That feels like making a scene. Sometimes scenes need to be made, Commander. Sometimes the truth requires a stage. The morning of the bridal shower, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror wearing my army dress blue uniform for the first time in 3 years. The dark blue fabric was crisp, the gold buttons polished, the ribbons arranged in perfect order above my left breast pocket. The Bronze Star was prominently displayed, along with ribbons for my combat deployments, commendation medals, and service awards. On my shoulders, the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel caught the morning light. I looked like what I was, a decorated military officer with 23 years of distinguished service. The shower was held at Patricia's house, the same venue where family gatherings had felt like endurance tests for years. But this time I walked through the front door with my shoulders squared and my head held high. The conversation stopped when I entered the living room. 20 women, Rachel's friends and family members, turned to stare at the officer who'd just walked into their champagne and finger food celebration. Amy! Rachel's voice was higher than usual. You came in uniform. I thought it was appropriate, I said, accepting a glass of champagne from a server. After all, this is a celebration, and I wanted to dress the part. Patricia approached with the fixed smile she used for managing social situations. Amy, dear, don't you think the uniform is a bit much for a bridal shower? Is it? I was under the impression that military service was something this family respected and honored. The room had gone quiet, everyone pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Of course we respect your service, Patricia said quickly. It's just that today is about Rachel. Absolutely, and I wanted Rachel's friends to know exactly who they're getting as a sister-in-law. I turned to address the room. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Amy Johnson, United States Army, retired. I served for 23 years, including 3 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. I commanded an 800-person logistics battalion and received the Bronze Star for heroism during the 2019 marketplace bombing in Afghanistan. The silence was profound. Several women glanced between me and Patricia, sensing undercurrents they didn't understand. Rachel's maid of honor, a woman named Jessica I'd met briefly at the engagement party, stepped forward. That's incredible. A Bronze Star, that's like really important, right? It's awarded for heroic achievement in combat operations, I said evenly. I was honored to receive it for actions that saved 17 civilian lives during a terrorist attack. Oh my God, Rachel, you never mentioned your sister was a war hero. Rachel's face was flushed, her composure cracking. We don't really talk about military stuff much in our family. Why not? Jessica's question was innocent but devastating. I would never stop talking about it if my sister had done something that amazing. Patricia stepped in, her voice carrying a warning edge. Amy has always been very private about her service. We respect that. Actually, I said, meeting Patricia's eyes directly, I've never been private about my service. I've simply never been asked about it. The room's energy shifted palpably. These women, Rachel's friends, colleagues, social circle, were looking at me with genuine admiration and interest. The kind of recognition I'd never received from my own family. Tell us about Afghanistan, someone called out. What was it like? So I did. I told them about leading convoys through hostile territory, about coordinating humanitarian aid deliveries, about the day that earned me the Bronze Star. I spoke about my soldiers, my responsibilities, the weight of command in a combat zone. I watched my family's faces as I spoke. Patricia looked mortified, as if I were revealing embarrassing family secrets instead of distinguished military service. David, who'd arrived with Sarah and the twins, seemed genuinely surprised by the details of my career. Rachel looked confused and hurt, as if I'd been deliberately withholding this information instead of being consistently ignored when I tried to share it. But the other women in the room hung on every word. They asked intelligent questions, expressed genuine admiration, and treated my service with the respect it deserved. "I can't believe Rachel never told us about this," Jessica said during a lull in the conversation. "Having a decorated combat veteran as a sister, that's incredible." "Well," I said, glancing at Rachel, "I suppose it's easy to forget about things that don't fit the family narrative." The confrontation came after the other guests had left. Patricia, David, Sarah, Rachel, and I sat in the living room while the twins played in the backyard, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. "I think we need to talk," Patricia said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I think we do too. What you did today was unnecessary and hurtful. You embarrassed Rachel at her own bridal shower. I told the truth about my military service. If that embarrassed anyone, the problem isn't with me." David leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Amy, we've always been proud of your service, but there's a time and place for everything." "When, David?" "When was the time and place? Your law school graduation, when I was deployed. Your wedding when I was in Afghanistan. Rachel's engagement party where I stood in a corner for 3 hours without being introduced to anyone." "That's not fair," Rachel interjected. "We've always included you." "Have you? Tell me about the marketplace bombing, Rachel. Tell me about the Bronze Star. Tell me about any aspect of my military career that doesn't involve me being away from family events." The silence stretched until Sarah, surprisingly, spoke up. "I didn't know about the Bronze Star," she said quietly. "In 10 years of marriage to David, no one ever mentioned it." David turned to his wife, then back to me. I guess we never really understood the significance." "You understood the significance when you attended the Veterans Gala. You understood it when you donated to military charities. You understood it when you listened to James speak about honoring military service. You just chose not to understand it when it came to me." Patricia's composure finally cracked. "We did the best we could, Amy. Your military career was so foreign to us, so complicated, we didn't know how to relate to it. You could have learned. You could have asked questions. You could have treated my achievements the same way you treat David's legal victories or Rachel's marketing campaigns. You could have introduced me as Lieutenant Colonel Johnson instead of just Amy." "We didn't know you wanted that," Rachel said, tears in her eyes. "I shouldn't have had to ask for basic recognition of 23 years of service to my country. I shouldn't have had to explain why my Bronze Star matters. I shouldn't have had to wear my uniform to my sister's bridal shower to get my own family to see me." The conversation continued for another hour, circling through years of hurt and misunderstanding. There were apologies, explanations, promises to do better. But something fundamental had shifted. The family dynamic that had minimized my achievements for 30 years couldn't be repaired with a single conversation. 2 weeks later, I moved to Colorado Springs. The job offer from a veteran-owned consulting firm had been sitting in my email for months. A position helping military contractors optimize their operations, drawing on exactly the kind of experience my family had dismissed as logistics work. The morning I left Ohio, Rachel called. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "about us not asking questions. I realize I don't know anything about your soldiers, your deployments, your experiences. I was wondering, would you be willing to tell me? Maybe we could do video calls, and you could share some stories." It was a start. Not a solution, not a repair, but a beginning. "I'd like that, Rachel. And Amy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry it took James recognizing you for me to see what I'd been missing." 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation addressed to Lieutenant Colonel Amy Johnson, Ret. Inside, a handwritten note from Rachel, I want all my friends to meet my sister, the war hero. I smiled as I read it. It wasn't perfect. Hero wasn't the right word, and my service was about more than dramatic moments in combat zones. But it was recognition. It was an acknowledgement that Commander Johnson existed, that her achievements mattered, that her story was worth telling. I RSVP'd yes and began shopping for a new dress. Something appropriate for a wedding. Something that honored both the woman I'd become and the officer I'd always been. Something that would look perfect with my bronze star pin on the lapel. Because some truths, once spoken, refuse to be silenced again. And some identities, once reclaimed, transform not just the person who owns them, but everyone who finally learns to see them clearly. I was Lieutenant Colonel Amy Johnson, United States Army, retired. I was a decorated combat veteran, a Bronze Star recipient, a leader who'd earned her rank through service and sacrifice. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.